Race is one of the most taboo topics, and yet it deeply shapes our identities, relationships, and the systems we live in. In this raw and real Taboo Talk conversation, the permission slip granted hosts Kylie and Sydney confront what it means to be white and raised in environments where race was either ignored, minimized, or weaponized. We unpack what it means to examine privilege and how whiteness shows up in everyday life. There's encouragement to question the stories that keep us comfortable and stay in the work of unlearning. You'll hear reflections on inherited bias, white fragility, and the emotional cost of silence. We discuss why colorblindness isn't the virtue we were once taught it was, and above all, why being called in is an act of trust, not attack. This episode is for anyone willing to stop whispering about racism and start reckoning. Doing so with courage, compassion, and a whole lot of humility. We've been told not to talk about racism at the dinner table, so let's dive into it and unpack it.
Oh.
All right. Well, today it's just Sydney and I. Hillary's still recovering and Kristen had something come up. So you get to hear from the two of us exclusively. Huzzah!
Hello.
And that's probably the last crazy fun thing we're going to have, because this is a hot topic. And I actually did prep for this episode. I was reading this book. Yeah. Those are my, I've actually put some thought into this. So I thought it'd be kind of good to start with just a little brief history about our walk with racism, each of us. And I can go first, or you can go first, Sydney. It does not matter to me.
You already have the floor. Go ahead.
All right. Okay. So for me, just to recap, in case anyone hasn't figured this out or hasn't heard it in another episode, I grew up Mormon, and the way that my mother framed racism was it was something done by bad people. She was not racist. And we don't see color in people, right? We just love everybody and we just judge them for who they are. And that line from Dr. King's speech of judge people on the content of their character, not on the color of their skin. So this was definitely my thought process growing up, and I definitely thought I wasn't racist. And nothing really changed for me until I started doing a little bit of growth, probably I'm trying to go back, probably 2018. I became aware of there were two African-American prominent social media content influencers. I don't know if that's the right term, but they were called Sisters in Zion, was their name for the two of them. And they were two Black members of the Mormon Church. And they talked about things that were problematic within current doctrine, past doctrine, the culture of the organization. And it was the first time where it crossed my radar and was like, wait, what? And so I was aware that there was a little bit of, and I say a little because at the time I thought it was a little bit of racist history with the organization. The biggest thing being that until 1978, Black men could not hold the priesthood within the organization. And I don't know where everybody's at when they're listening to that. It's a big deal within the Mormon organization, because you weren't allowed to go to the temple as a Black person for a long time, until 1978. And that means that you couldn't return to live with God. So it's a big fucking deal. And George, fast forward 2 years. So I'm kind of learning a little bit here and there. Fast forward 2 years, George Floyd is murdered. And very quickly, my world flipped upside down, my worldview, because I was made aware of how much systemic racism is still a very much, it is interwoven into all the threads of our lives. And it forced me to look at the history of the organization, and it was far worse than I had thought. And this is what really started me on my own journey of realizing that I'm a racist. And I think people, when we hear, as white people, when somebody says that to us, we tend to get defensive, right? Because in our head, racism is mean people who do bad things, right? But racism is simply a system in which our world has been built, in which our world continues to enforce. And so until we talk about it and until we move forward as a whole, it's not going to go anywhere. So this is kind of where I'm at, like what brought me to this conversation, how I started learning. I'd say probably the biggest gut punch for me in other than the murder of this human and watching that go down on social media. Besides that, learning that the 13th Amendment had a loophole to allow slavery to continue after it was passed, that was like, it completely undid everything that I knew about American history, and led to so many other things, like learning about the fact that our police system came from slave patrols, which that ideology just slowly got passed down from generation to generation. The fact that the prison system and mass incarceration of Black people in our country, that is the modern day equivalent, right? Because they're doing slave labor and it's okay because the 13th Amendment says if they're a criminal, it's okay. And so it just changed everything for me. So I'll quit giving my synopsis. That's where I'm at. That's how I was shaped. What about you, Sydney?
Well, I have a few questions for you, actually.
Okay, yeah.
Because that was awesome. Like, I love learning about you, especially with your Mormon background and like how you've broken out of that. Because not only like have you grown up in a different region than I, but like just hearing your perspective completely different, not only from like the set of demographics and region, but also like religious, spiritual, like. And I had no idea, like within the Mormon church, and like that separates you from God if you can't go to temple. That makes no sense to me. It absolutely, like, it's awful. That just blew my mind.
Well, let this blow your mind a little further then. So the first prophet of the organization, Joseph Smith, he was not racist. And in fact, there were Black individuals who were given the priesthood, and then and that was only for men, and it still is. But women do go through the temple, right? And so even then, Black men and women did go through the temple and do the ceremonies and the different things. So they had access, right? They were going to return to live with God. It wasn't until the second prophet came into power, who was an absolute fucking racist, and he started changing the doctrine because God said so. And for those who are just listening and not watching on YouTube, I did air quotes on that one. So that's when things changed. And so overnight, now there weren't a ton of people of color within the church at that time, but overnight, anyone who had gone through the temple, who had the priesthood and was Black, overnight they lost that. Mm-hmm. It's like, and so when they fled Illinois at the time, they were going to Utah, what is now Utah, modern day Utah. And the way it was framed to me growing up in the cult was that it was because they were being persecuted because of their religion. They weren't being persecuted because of their religion. They were being persecuted for these other things. One of them including like this now change into racism. So like people had slaves with them that as they went across the plains. on their pioneer trek. Mormons reenact pioneer treks still to this day. I did one, right? We pretended to be pioneers pulling a fucking handcart. No mention of slaves that went along with them. They are not in the artwork anywhere. And not that everyone had a slave with them, but that was part of the story, and it is nowhere to be found within the artwork, the stories, etc. Okay, they get into Utah. Slaves are allowed to be used to pay their tithing. Tithing is supposed to be based on your profit for the year, you know, and they're trading people as payment. And these are just some of the things that were so problematic. But yeah, it's a big deal. Continue with your questions.
I wonder if the reason why they're like African Americans were not a part of that story or that narrative or artwork, or you're right. It was a white man's journey. Is that maybe I could see it being given credit to the fact that it's a white man's journey, and that's not the case. Slaves probably did a lot of the work, so it's really, that's incredibly devastating and sad. Just a way of white supremacists and giving credit to the white race. I'll two more questions.
Yeah.
What, or if any, as you were growing up, did you have any like run-ins, where you've lived, like with, racism, or hey, that's how this person was treated is not the way I've been treated, based on race? Did you have any of those
no, because of the way that racism is set up. So first of all, this book that I've had this book for a couple of years, hadn't read it yet. That's on me. So I started reading it this week. I'm about a third of the way through it. And again, more and more like moments, because what she talks about is what if we can remove the emotion and the judgment and really look at it as racism as a system. She starts bringing it down, right? When was the first time that you had a person of color as a teacher? I didn't until high school. And there was one that I can think of, right? The way that we talk about neighborhoods, right? There are these coded words on like, oh, this neighborhood is sketchy. That is a racist delineation of that was a neighborhood that was primarily Black, right? And so as far as run-ins are concerned, no, because I grew up in a white homogenous area. The diversity of the town that I grew up in, Asian was the non-white race. There were Black people at my school, but not many of them. And yeah, but I was definitely told that there were neighborhoods I was not supposed to go to because of safety. So these things, and of course, those were just safety concerns, Sydney, that people were telling me. Nobody openly said this is a racist statement, right? And I certainly didn't see it that way then. I do now, but yeah.
I love that you brought that up because, from my trips out west, the few that I've had, I look around me and I observe just, what I see when I am, in the Southeast versus out there. Unless I'm in a big city, you see diversity, but I sometimes feel like I'm in a white suburb, a segregated white suburb in the Southeast, and the fact that you brought that up is so real because I thought to myself, I feel that the western part of the country, identifies as more progressive, but really that's just a cover up for ignorance. Absolutely 100%. And to piggy off that, I believe it's as a whole, the white people in America have at some point, to some degree, or at least almost all the time, I mean, all the time, are ignorant to the fact that they say they're not racist, but you can catch them being racist because they've never been in those shoes. They've never had family or known personal stories of friends that were, targeted or
Yeah.
offended or, who were treated poorly or not given the opportunities because of the color of their skin.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you use specifically the word progressive, because she talks about it in the book that progressives are actually some of the most harmful in trying to work through racism, because they get so entrenched in, well, no, I'm a good person and I don't believe that we should be discriminating and I am not racist, when because they're getting stuck in that emotional judgment, moral idea of what racism is: bad people who do mean things. But when you step back and you realize where I decided to buy my home, where I decided to shop, where who are my friends, right? Like when you stop and look at these things and you're like, oh, I am racist. And you have to get to this point where you can look at it without the judgment.
Yeah, you're right.
It's just interesting that you said progressive. It just tricked it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I try to be careful. I have many friends of color, and we've had conversations because there were times where I was ignorant in due to the fact that I've never walked their shoes. And they're I often have friends that are extremely passionate. I'm drawn to people as such, and they are empathetic and passionate about what has happened in the past and, you know, implementing change and seeing people of color being represented everywhere. And I am 100% supportive of that because that is so important that, you know, little girls of color go to the movies and they can see a Black Little Mermaid, or, because that is just, you know, I never thought about that growing up, and I'm calling myself out. There's been several times in my life where I've had to call myself out, and because I've been like, oh, I love everybody. Well, yeah, I do. Was I raised racist? No. But there were times where I would follow, especially when I was younger, follow, the people that looked like me because I wanted to belong and fit in. And I'd realize, wow, that's not right. It's not right at all. I had to step back and, take part in the fact that I had to become aware of it and make a commitment, write a contract to myself, be like, these are my ideas and my values. And I have to hold this space for the African American race and the journey that they have come through, because I'm never gonna, I'm obviously never gonna change color skin, but like, I want to be a part of this coming together and understanding. And I believe there's only way we can do that is to ask questions, to sit back and reflect again on all areas of life, but to admit to ourselves where we went wrong and how we can work together moving forward.
Yeah.
Just creating a better world for the future. So systemic racism is a huge deal in the South, and I realized it when I was just in middle school, um, just by the school systems. I was in the magnet program, but like, public school was all African Americans, and all the white people wanted to send their kids to, you know, private school because the schools were better. They wanted their kids to be safe. And I was like, how are we, what about, I, what about the safety of everyone? You know, there's no safe space in the white schools because white schools are breeding hate, right? And exclusion, right? And then how I guess the lowly, what's the best word? The public schools in Montgomery. Maybe I shouldn't get into this because it's just such a racy thing, and I didn't go there, but there's just not a lot of attention there. It's sad, and kids are hungry and they need help, and it starts, with who we're electing.
Yeah.
As our mayor, as our governor,
Yeah.
all that, so all that to be said, not making it about me and what my experience was, because I am not African American, but making it about how us as the white race can come together and work with the African American race.
Yeah.
How can we make this better? And the only way that I can think of is, let's admit the fact. Even if you don't think you're racist, you have to come to the realization that you are. You are. Absolutely.
You
so
are.
Anyway,
I want to ask you a couple of questions. So
yeah.
Number one, and there are no wrong answers, just so we're clear. Are you feeling like, is this an uncomfortable conversation for you?
It is, because I've seen it personally, to the people that I love. And I can't, maybe because I'm an empath and I can't do anything about it. And the fact that, let me step back. I can do things about it, which is speak. I'm doing something about it right now. I'm speaking the fact that I know there's a lot of angry people, of all races about this, and there's a divide, and there's this fear, just, and I feel like it's polarizing and putting us against each other. So I don't know how to fix it, to be honest. But that's why we're having these conversations.
Right. So I was trying to find the exact quote in my book, so that's why I was looking down for a minute. But these conversations are not meant to be comfortable. Like, that is one of the biggest things that we have to work through, is we have to get to the point where stopping our racist patterns is more important than convincing other people that we aren't racist. Right. And that was something that she said in the book. Robin DiAngelo is the author. We have to get past this idea that it's bad people who do, or mean people that do bad things. Like you said, we are all racist. White people, we are all racist. Now, we may also be working on our anti-racism and how we show up in that fight, but that does not change the fact that we were raised in a racist environment. Even if you didn't have, and something she says in the book that I want to make sure listeners realize is, if you are sitting there and you're going, well, you don't know me. You don't have a right to call me racist. I would really suggest picking this book up and really sitting with, why is that triggering that response within you? Are you looking at racism as a system that our country was built on? Or are you looking at it, are you taking what I'm saying as, I'm judging you? Because I'm not. But the fact remains that this is the country we were built on. And let's take it back to the founding fathers, especially right now, when there are so many people who are like, the founding fathers were so amazing and they had such a vision and we're not doing what they, oh no, we are doing exactly what they wanted. Jefferson, to be clear, before I get into this, founding fathers did have some amazing enlightened ideas. Yay, so glad that we followed those. They also were flawed human beings. Jefferson was a slave owner, right? So he had an investment in making sure that the moral piece of having slaves, that contradicts that all men are created equal. So how do they bridge the two, right? So what he did was he suggested that there were natural differences between the races and asked scientists to find them. And specifically, what he asked them to do was to look at why are Blacks inferior? Jefferson did not say, are they inferior? What are possibly things that make them inferior? The assumption going into their research, therefore biased, was why are they inferior? And from that specific research and support came the justification to keep slavery going, even though they were proclaiming all men are created equal. Mm-hmm. Even from then, right? It wasn't just slave owners in the Civil War who didn't want to give up their free labor. We were fucking founded in a system built to benefit white people.
White men.
White men, yes, let's be clear. There is some talk in there about, you know, the women piece, but we don't want to center it about that right now. Centering is a good point to lead into, which is when these conversations happen and they're uncomfortable, first of all, see them, you can see them as a door out, right, to get out of the conversation, or you can see them as a door in, to invite you in, sit with the discomfort, and figure out, how does this fit within the learned experience, where I'm at in walking the walk as an anti-racist. Maybe you haven't really started that. If you're listening, I encourage you, pick up this book. I would start with this one if you're a white person. White Fragility is probably a good one to start with.
White Fragility.
Yeah, well, I'll list some others that are really good. But just start listening more. Don't get defensive. If somebody calls you on a racist comment, sit with it for a moment. And if you legit don't understand, ask for understanding. Can you help me understand what I said that was problematic? Now, I will also say, it is not people of color's job to educate you. So in that moment, if it's a person of color saying, hey, that was racist, please don't say that, or whatever, take that with you and go talk to a white person about it and say, this is what happened. Have those conversations with other white people, because it is not their, they have been carrying this burden for hundreds of years already, being pushed down to less than human.
I think I'm confused with, why go to a white person if a Black person tells you you're racist?
Because it's not their job to educate us. It's not.
I think it's important for them to educate us about their experience.
Yes.
But then there's also a discernment to know when they are too much in an emotional state to not hear and to have a conversation about how you can, come to an understanding about what can we do together to move forward with this? How am I and with you, how can we make this work, this relationship equal opportunity, where whatever the conversation is about. But obviously, sometimes the polarized, the white people with the fear and the Black people with a fear of white, not having any trust, which is so true about, there being, in the 80s, just ripped from cars and sentenced to jail for life on death row because they're Black. And that is, just watch Just Mercy. That is very much true. It is, it is a real life thing, and people don't like to talk about it because it is uncomfortable. And if it's not affecting them, then they're not going to do anything about it.
Right.
But I've had, like, for instance, I worked at an Alabama state agency, and I went a year and a half ago, and I walked into the cafeteria, and the lady that was checking me out, she was a little bit younger than me probably, and she was of color. And I come in there almost every morning. I get like a juice and an apple and granola bar or whatever. And I have my hands full because, I'm always just scatterbrained, trying to get up to my office, and I'm getting out my credit card, and I just kind of, obviously I'm coming up to the counter, and I just kind of toss it on the counter. And she was offended because I'm white, and she got upset and she stormed off, and I had no idea what happened. Like, no idea what was going on. She didn't come back. I waited and waited, and like 10 minutes later, literally, somebody came up, and it was different. It was a white manager, and he checked me out. And then the next morning I come up, and she sees me. She helps the people in front of me. And I don't remember what race they were, but it was because I come up to the line, and she immediately goes back, and she tells her manager she can't serve me because I'm a racist. I threw a card at her, and I triggered her somehow. And I was advised by my colleagues, once they told me after a few weeks of her not serving me, why she won't serve me. They were like, well, you threw your card at her, and she, felt like you're, offended by the color of her skin, and maybe you should go and apologize. And immediately, what my first response was? What the hell?
Right.
Yeah, I was like, but then I had to step back and be like, I don't know what her experience are with white people, but I know what my experience as a white person in Montgomery, Alabama is growing up, and it's not good. If I were to imagine, so I could understand, or not understand, but only imagine what she's faced. But I was hard for me to, especially with me struggling with pride. I do struggle with pride. Coming up to someone that I don't know, and I thought, well, maybe if you use context clues, she would know that I'm not racist. So, it that I will admit that it's hard to come to those conversations and deal with your, as a white person, when there's so much hate based on the past. How can we work together moving forward? And I keep saying that because, fear holds us back. And as my friends of color, when they were trying to explain this to me, and when I was in my early 20s, they said, Sydney, you have to realize that, our families, they taught us to immediately fight back, to white enforcement, to fear them because we were snatched, and it makes sense that there's just a lot of just friction there. And fear, and there's just fear on both sides. And I'm trying my best to come to an understanding, and it's difficult, even with that situation.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about that as a white person? What would you have done in that situation if you were me?
Well, really quick, I want to ask a question. The coworkers that came to you and told you why this person was offended, what race were they?
Well, to me, it was more so the respect that I held for that individual.
No. The coworkers that came and said, "Oh, she's offended because you threw the card." The ones that explained that to you, what race were they? Were they white or were they people of color?
African American, yes.
They were African Americans. Okay.
It was an older gentleman who I respect very much, and he was very gentle and came to me with, he just pushed it very lightly, and I respected him for how he approached it with me.
Yeah.
Because he has the wisdom of, this is hard, maybe she's not going to take this well. And, I was, of course, even though he delivered it so great, he couldn't have done it better, but it was hard for me.
Yeah.
And was like, well, I'm doing, even though I'm doing my best, that degree of ignorance is there,
Yeah.
and so I'm trying to hold that empathy in that space and being the bigger person. And how bad do I really want us to be integrated, the state of Alabama, to have, nobody see color, right? How bad do I want this?
Yeah.
So it's like, I will literally, I will bend over backwards for it, but I won't be trampled on for it. Does that make sense? I'm not going to deny my human, I don't know the best way to describe this, basic humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. It's it is difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. To answer your question, what would I have done in that situation? Well, first of all, I mean, if I'm being we're talking now, or are we talking like 10 years ago, Kylie? 10 years ago, Kylie would have been offended that this person was like refusing to serve me. And yeah, I probably would have had some sort of racist response of like,
But now,
if that happened, if I was carrying things and I threw my card down and this person had a reaction and walked away, I would be trying to figure out in that moment what was causing it.
well, yeah, and
I probably would have brought it back to some friends that were white and say, this is what happened. What am I missing here?
I think I'm still confused as to why you would hold you if you go to your friends that were white. How can you see it from a different perspective? You know, especially
Because
not
I can
growing up.
have somebody else who's aware of the fact that I'm racist, because we are,
Right.
be able to look at it from the other perspective. I might not understand that particular cashier's under like their experience, but because they have been oppressed as a people for hundreds of years, they should not have to fight to be unoppressed, and also have to explain to me why they should be unoppressed and why.
That's the thing. They've had to do that. They've had to fight, and
right. And so they shouldn't have to
survival.
also explain it to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why.
Okay.
I would say talk to a white person, and I think that's why a lot of I remember when I was first starting this journey, there was this commentary of, we don't need more white woman tears. And at first I kind of like, that took me back, and I was like, but you don't know me. Like, you don't know that I might genuinely be hurting and upset for the pain that my race has caused. But they don't need that. What they need is for me to do the work within my sphere, within the people that I can offer influence to, because that's how I dismantle the system, not by giving them more words of how sorry I am that my race has done this. They don't need that. They need, it's kind of like with, if this helps illustrate it, women's suffrage back in the 20s, getting the right to vote, right? We had to get men involved because they were the ones that had the power to make the changes, right? So men had to grant women the right to vote, okay? People of color need white people who are all in power.
I get you. Yeah.
To make the changes to help them not be oppressed on the same level and to make it right. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I know what you're saying. When you first said it the first few times, I was like, I'm just not clicking. But now,
No,
yeah, it's definitely, I get what you're saying. No, yeah, I remember I was sitting on a couch after like I was visiting Atlanta for a doctor's appointment. I was staying at a friend's house, and she's white, and she was a Trump supporter, and, keep her anonymous, but she, we're watching the news and she was like, I don't understand, Sydney. Why are they, and she was talking about the like African Americans, why are they breaking in and raiding? I was like, because they're angry because no one's listening to them. And, of course, her morals and values were like, and the degree of ignorance, to her, on her behalf, she can't come to that full awareness because I don't know. I knew she grew up in a privileged white suburb in Atlanta, with mostly white friends, and I know she's friendly to the African American race. She doesn't identify as a racist, but she doesn't understand this the struggle. So that's why from my perspective, I think white people need to educate themselves on, or try to reach down and find that nth degree of empathy that they don't have.
Yeah.
Because they don't have it. And they're not trying to put themselves in other people's shoes. They're just seeing an angry race that is having to fight, and then they're pointing fingers and saying that they're the villain, when really they don't have any other resources. They don't have anybody advocating for them. They don't have anything to do but to raise their voice and yell.
Yeah.
Or, hypothetically. So,
no, I think I think this is a good place for us to pause, and because we have something that we need to go do as a team. But I would love to come back and continue the conversation if you are open to that, because I think these types of conversations is how we as white people work through this and start thinking about these things and making changes within our lives. So come back for part 2, everybody, and we will continue the conversation.
This is only half the permission slip. Come back for part 2 to keep the conversation and the growth going. As a bonus, we've created a workbook to help you reflect and spark real growth, no matter where you're starting from. Think of it as your next permission slip in PDF form. And if you're ready for support that's as real as these convos, you're in the right place. For each of us hosts, coaches clients just like you. Sydney supports people reclaiming their worth beyond performance and perfection. Kristen helps individuals unlock their true potential by building confidence and self-worth. And as for me, I'm Kylie, and I coach unconventional humans navigating the hard, beautiful work of becoming who they were always meant to be. You'll find links to connect with us, learn more, or apply to work together in the show notes. We'd love to meet you right where you are. Be sure to subscribe or follow, depending on your platform, so you never miss the permission slip you didn't know you needed. Whether you're looking for support, have a topic you want us to unpack, or just need to drop a comment, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for hanging out with us. We'll see you next time.